Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name's Amanda. I have two kids. I have a little boy who is 2.5. His name is Brody. And I have a 5-month-old daughter named Addison. So, welcome to the video. This is gonna be a story time video, me explaining the story of Brody's birth and why I was induced and why I had a C-section. Let's get into the video. Okay, so when I was pregnant with Brody, I was super excited just to have him, and I was so excited for the birth. I wasn't super nervous about it. I do have a Brody's birth vlog posted, so I will link that up in the cards and in the description, so you can check that out if you want. But I wasn't super nervous. I was really excited, and being that it was my first baby, obviously didn't know what to expect with the birth and how everything would go and when I would go into labor and all of that good stuff. But my mom had both my brother and I 4 weeks early, and I don't know if that's ever really a factor in when you go into labor, but I was kind of hoping that maybe I'd have him like a week early or something like that. I was kind of hoping for like 39 weeks, but my doctor, I think he said it doesn't really matter like what necessarily happened with your mom. That doesn't really mean that's what's gonna happen with you. And obviously that was true in my case. So anyway, my due date with Brody was June 16th. And yeah, so as the date began approaching, I was getting super excited, and I was not really having like any signs of labor as the weeks were approaching. And I was drinking red raspberry leaf tea. They say that that helps to, like, I guess, strengthen your uterus or whatever to help with contractions. And some people say that it helps to put you into labor. You will find out that wasn't the case for me. Actually, one of my close friends was over at my house when she was pregnant, like a little while later after I had Brody, and she was like super pregnant. She comes over and I gave her a cup of that tea, and then like she went home, and like an hour later her water broke, and I'm like, what the crap? Like, that did not happen for me. So I was drinking the tea, I was bouncing on a birthing ball, I was climbing stairs, I was doing these crazy squats and exercises. One of my other friends was looking up all of these like funky, like weird squats and things you can do that will help induce labor. I was trying it all. None of it worked. The only things I didn't do were I didn't drink castor oil, and I did not do like the evening primrose thing, or I think that's what it's called. But anyway, so yeah, I've heard horror stories about castor oil, so that was not for me. But yeah, so basically the date came and went. I kept hoping that something was gonna happen, nothing happened. And basically I would keep going in for my appointments, and I was not dilated at all. I was a little bit thinned out. Like I wanna say, if I'm remembering, this was 2.5 years ago, so I'm trying to remember everything, but I wanna say I was like 60% effaced or something like that, but not anything drastic, and I was not dilated. So after I went overdue, after my due date passed, we were looking at the dates of everything, and Steven, my husband, was supposed to go out of town on a business trip on like the 23rd, I think. And obviously if I didn't have the baby, or I had just had the baby, he wouldn't have left. But he was hoping that he could still go to the trip. Like if I had had the baby a week early, then he would have been home. Sorry, my phone's ringing. He would have been home with us for like a week or so, and then he could go on his trip. But as the dates continued to go, obviously he chose not to go out of town, and to stay with me. So then next thing I know, I'm 41 weeks, and I still have no signs of the baby. And basically days kept going, and then we started talking with my doctor about induction. He was not pushing it. He didn't say I had to do it by any means. But basically the way that my doctor works is he was like, okay, you can get to 42 weeks and then we can talk about it and figure out when we want to schedule it or whatever. because he just always said nothing good happens after 42 weeks. That was his motto. I loved my doctor. He also delivered Addison, like such a great doctor, and I just really trusted his judgment. He was never really jumpy about anything. I would come in there sometimes for my appointments and be like, oh, this is happening, does that mean something? And he'd be like, no, that's normal. Like, he was so chill, and so I really appreciated that because it helped me to be very calm and relaxed during the process. But anyway, so he was like, you know, you can get to 42 weeks if you want. But also, so my husband works with his family, and so they were also leaving town on the 23rd of June. And so we were sitting there going, man, if we don't induce and kind of like schedule this thing, then they may not be here and they may totally miss it. And also my father-in-law's birthday is the 25th. So we just, and we just kind of wanted to schedule it or whatever, if possible, when it came down to the fact that I wasn't really showing any progress and I wasn't going into labor. So we decided to schedule it for, I would go in on June 21st, about 8 p.m. that night. They would start me on, they call it, I think it was called Cytotech, and it's basically to help you to begin to dilate. And then they would just see how I progressed overnight, and then the next morning we would kind of continue the day of being induced. And you know, it's so crazy because when you have a baby, I think, or when you're going to have a baby, you have this grand idea of what it's gonna be like and what that moment's gonna be like when you go into labor, when your contractions are picking up and you get to pack your bag and go to the hospital and all this stuff. And unfortunately, that wasn't my story, and you just never know. You never really know how it's gonna go. But yeah, so I just decided that it was gonna be the best thing for us and for our family to schedule to be induced. And so we scheduled it for the 21st to go in that night. I kept hoping as the days are leading up that something was gonna happen and then we wouldn't have to go through with that, but that wasn't the case. So we went in on June 21st and they started me on the Cytotech stuff, and yeah, didn't feel anything, and it was, you know, it was all good. And then around 7 a.m. I woke up, I got to sleep for a little bit in my hospital room, and I woke up around 7 a.m. feeling contractions. They were, you know, uncomfortable, but nothing that was too painful. And let me also say, leading up to going into labor and birth and all of that, I had watched so many birth vlogs on YouTube and birth stories and all of this kind of stuff. And so I really did want to have, you know, if I could, I really wanted to have a natural birth. However, I hear that it's a lot different having a natural birth when your body goes into labor on its own versus when you're induced, because the drugs and everything that they're giving you can make the contractions, I hear, just way more intense. I don't know if that's true, but I've heard that from some of the nurses said that. And also because when you're being induced, the process can be so incredibly long, much longer than if your body naturally does it, that sometimes it's harder for people to withstand the pain for that amount of time. But I don't know, I'm sure there's people who have done it. Let me know in the comments if you had a natural birth or if you had an epidural or how you did it. So anyway, I was beginning to feel contractions, but it was nothing that I couldn't handle. And as the day progressed, they began to quickly, like I want to say, like I said, I started feeling them around 7 a.m. My mom and my best friend Ashton got there shortly after that, and they began to pick up pretty quickly. And to the point where my doctor didn't feel like we would need to do Pitocin just because I was progressing pretty well. So, but yeah, it was intense. I found it to be most comfortable when I was in, like when I was sitting on the birthing ball. I would sit there, and versus like if I was laying in the bed, I was pretty uncomfortable. So I liked sitting on the ball. And my mom was so sweet. She's just the best. this is so creative and funny, but she brought a crock pot to the hospital room and had hot stones in the crock pot that were really, really warm and hot. And she brought like all these essential oils and stuff. And so she was like, while I was sitting on the birthing ball, she was like massaging my back with these, like giving me a hot stone massage basically. And when I was sitting in the bed, she was like massaging my calves with lavender and eucalyptus essential oil and all this stuff. So it was just really nice and relaxing. And like I said, my best friend Ashton was there, you know, just helping me out also. Steven was obviously there. And so, and I had a good playlist on. That's one thing I really enjoyed. And all the nurses would comment. They were like, oh my gosh, this is like the most fun hospital room ever, because I had this like awesome playlist going all day, and it just really helped have a great vibe in the room while you're going through some pretty intense moments. So it was crazy though, because you know, you never, like, until you go through contractions and until you feel it, you like have no clue really how to imagine it will feel. But it was it's the craziest thing, because in between contractions, you're like happy, you're fine, you don't feel pain, you feel great. And then when the contraction comes on, oh my word, it is very intense. And I had extreme back labor also, or I think that's what they call, gosh, I'm like so far removed, I'm trying to remember it, but back labor. So my back was, the contraction would like reach all the way around my back, and it was just an incredible amount of pain. And I just kept breathing through it and really trying to just focus and all of that kind of stuff. And then eventually, I think somewhere in there they came in and they broke my water to help it progress also. And so once they did that, the contractions also got a lot more intense. And so one of the final times I was checked, like before I did get an epidural, my doctor came in. I was thinking for sure I'm a 7 or an 8. Like, this is so intense. It's so much pain. And he came in and he's like, he said, you're a 5.5. He said, I'll give you a 6. So sometimes I say 6, but I think I was technically a little less than 6 centimeters dilated. And by that point, I was like, man, I mean, every contraction, I was like crying. And so I knew that it would just be really, it was at the point where I just didn't think that I could get all the way to 10 without an epidural. So they called the anesthesiologist. He came in, and I'm not worried about needles. Like, I've never been worked up about it. I wasn't nervous about that. In fact, Steven was more concerned about me getting the epidural because he hates needles and he hates getting blood drawn, all that kind of stuff. Like, for me, it's not that big of a deal. And at that point, I was in so much pain that I was like, just give me the epidural. So I sat there on the side of the bed. My anesthesiologist was incredible. He was so sweet and nice, and it was so fast. And I mean, from the minute that he did it, before he got out of the hospital room, I already felt better. It was incredible. So I went from being in so much pain to sleeping. I took a nap and could not feel the contractions. It was incredible. And I think somewhere in there, they did end up giving me a tiny bit of Pitocin, but not much. Things were progressing really, really well. So yeah, so I didn't really need much. But anyway, next thing I knew, I was 10 centimeters and ready to push and all of that. So my doctor came in, and it was just Steven and I in the room with my doctor and the nurses, and they were coaching me through how to push and all of that kind of stuff. And what is crazy is, you know, I heard on some of the birth stories and vlogs that people say that pushing actually feels nice because like your body, you're just ready and it feels really good to push. That was not the case for me. I felt like the pushing was actually more painful than the contractions, and I did have an epidural. So what was weird was I didn't feel pain, but I felt a ton of pressure. So it felt like my like pelvis, I felt like it was just gonna snap. Like the pressure was so intense. And yeah, so I pushed for a long time and was not progressing. Like, they tried everything. They actually ended up trying a vacuum on Brody's head, and it didn't help. They also did an episiotomy episiotomy, and that also did not help. So there was pretty much nothing else they could do. And by that point I was like, I'm not gonna make it. This is so painful. Man, I give major props to people that do natural births. Like, you are incredible. Because man, it was intense and it hurt so bad. And they let me push for a really long time. My doctor is extremely slow to do C-sections. He's not a fan of that unless you really need it. But basically it just, yeah, it just wasn't gonna happen. And so they decided to prep me for a C-section. And really what it came down to was that my son, he was a bigger baby. He was 22 inches long and he was 8 pounds, 10 ounces. And I know that there's a lot of people that have much bigger babies than that. But also everyone's like size of everything is different. And so he just would not fit. So like I said, they prepped me for a C-section and we went in. And at the time, I wasn't super concerned about it. I just wanted the pain to stop and I wanted him out and healthy and all of that. But to be honest, I would have never imagined in a million years I would have had a C-section. I didn't think that was gonna be my story. I didn't think I would need that. And sometimes things just aren't the way that you plan, especially with births. Anything can happen. And so really the goal and the main goal is to keep you healthy and keep the baby healthy. And that's the most important thing, regardless of how it happens. And so I will say that after I had him, I really had to deal with that for a long time, because for some reason I felt like I had failed. I felt like my body failed me. I felt like a little inadequate. Like I thought, man, like I'm a woman, I'm supposed to be able to have a baby. Sorry, the camera cut out. But I just felt like, why can't I do it? All these other women can have babies, so a lot of people have babies so easily, and why did I have a C-section? And I had to really deal with a lot of that like after the fact. And even to this day, here I am 2.5 years removed. I just had a second C-section with my daughter Addison. You know, I just have to let it go. I mean, it's kind of one of those things where I wish I could have experienced that moment where, you know, they pull the baby out and they throw him up on your chest and it's this grand moment. And for me, it just didn't happen that way. I went in, I had the C-section. They did let me do skin to skin, which was great. But yeah, it was just totally different than I envisioned. And so I will say, like, and I just want to encourage you that if your birth story and everything doesn't pan out the way that you had hoped, it's okay, and it's gonna be okay, and you are still incredible. Like, you know, people would tell me, they're like, you know, back in the day before you could do a C-section and have surgeries, like women died in childbirth and babies died because if the woman couldn't push the baby out, then, you know, things went south quickly. And so that's what you have to focus on, is just that the main thing is keeping you healthy and keeping the baby healthy, and it doesn't matter how they get here. So anyway, as far as the C-section went, you know, I went into the operating room, they wheeled me in, and that was really smooth. I mean, it was not that big of a deal. It was really quick. And yeah, I mean, I remember, like, I didn't get sick from the anesthesia or anything. Some people experienced that, but I remember kind of like shaking a lot and being really itchy from the anesthesia, and that happened also with Addison, and that's just a normal side effect, they said. But I did kind of throw up a little bit I think it was when they wheeled me to my room. And the same thing happened with Addison, so I think it's just the way that the anesthesia sat or whatever. But you know, it's crazy because with Brody, I went in at 8 p.m. on the 21st, and then he was born at 8:54 p.m. on the 22nd. So it was 25 hours basically of trying to have him. And so it was a long day. And I had a double whammy. Not only did I go through all of the labor process and then the episiotomy and all of that, but then I also had the C-section and all of that, so it was like a double whammy, and it was intense. You know, there's this picture of us after we were finally wheeled into our room. I think by the time we got in there after recovery and everything, it was almost midnight before our families had been there all day waiting in the waiting room, and they finally got to come in to meet him. And I am like laying on the bed and I have like cold towels on my head. Brody's laying there and his face was all red. He had a slight fever when he was born. It was nothing that was you know, scary, but he had a slight fever and a slight thing on his head from them trying to get him out with the vacuum. And so it was just sad, you know. It had been a really long and stressful day for me, but also for Brody. I mean, he was kind of stuck in the birth canal for a long time and all of that. He kind of had a cone head, which did correct itself pretty quickly. But it's funny because when they wheeled me in for the C-section, one of the nurses who was there for the C-section, who was not in the room when I was going through labor, she could see his like feet way up here, and she's like, oh wow, no wonder you couldn't have him. His feet are really high. And I said, actually, they told me he has blonde hair, meaning they could see him, and he was just a really long baby. And she was like, oh my gosh, like he is big. And he was, yeah, he was. So, but anyway, so yeah, so that whole process was fine, and my recovery from the C-section was okay. My recovery with Addison was much easier than my recovery with Brody, and I think that's because I knew what to expect this time around. I hate the way pain pills make me feel. I didn't enjoy that. And just in the recovery process. So with Addison, I hardly took any. So it was just a much easier recovery with her than it was with Brody. But that is kind of the whole story as to why I had a C-section, how that went, and why I was induced. And yeah, I think that's kind of covers everything basically. So if you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. I hope you enjoy these story times so they can kind of get you to know me a little bit better. If you're new here and you haven't already subscribed, I would love it if you subscribe. I post new videos every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday about mom-related stuff, lifestyle stuff, family vlogs, mom vlogs, all of that kind of stuff. So if that's something you're interested in, please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Thank you guys so much for watching.